we can speak now to political scientist Dr. Una Aleksandra Berzina-Cerenkova, who is the head of the China Studies Center at Riga Stardins University. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. As we saw in that report, lots of smiles, handshakes, warm words. Does that paint the full picture, do you think?
Well, certainly that's what's being on display. But I think the full picture, of course, is also painted by the statements that have come out. For example, the Chinese side had been taking it slow on publicizing the joint statement, whereas the Russian side almost immediately put it out. But of course, yes, we see a lot of pageantry here, and that is the message.
Who needs who more? I mean, what's Beijing trying to get from Moscow? What's Moscow trying to get from Beijing, do you think?
So we saw that Moscow, the Russian delegation spoke about a whole area of issues and actually included China in its vision of history and future. But at the same time, they also agreed on many of the Chinese worldview aspects of Xi Jinping's worldview aspects, such as the global initiatives that China is pushing. So what they wanted, the topics that they kind of were pushing for covered, of course, economy. Economy matters, we know, for Russia as they are involved in an attack against Ukraine. The military also came up, and there were. The conversation also spoke about cooperation in deep space, but that's not a new topic, but that was kind of spoken up again. Culture links. Putin went to Harbin for a reason. Harbin is a city that has strong cultural links with Russia. Media. Actually, there were several interesting agreements signed between Xinhua, the Chinese state news agency, and several Russian media partners. Another interesting thing that Russia is willing to probably give and show in exchange for the things that it wants is the messages towards almost softening the border. We saw the parties speak about the establishing of a trans-border reserve for big cats, for example, and another one, which is extremely curious, how to jointly develop the big Ussuri Island, the very same island that the two countries had been in argument about historically, and the very same island that caused an outrage in Russia last year when reportedly Chinese official maps included all of its territory under the Chinese territory. So quite a list.
Quite a list. Of course, Ukraine, sort of the elephant in the room, really. I mean, Beijing says it doesn't help Moscow with regards to the Ukraine war effort. Beijing maintains it's neutral with regards to the war in Ukraine. Should we believe that?
Well, both sides are framing Russia's attack on Ukraine in the same way, in one voice, which is this is a pushback against U.S. hegemony. And the joint statement speaks about addressing the root causes of the war, of the crisis, as they call it, which, of course, according to the Russian and Chinese joint statements, means that they're seeing is that it's NATO's expansion that has caused the situation. So in that sense, China, it doesn't really get any more pro-Russian than that. But when it comes to practical support, of course, China knows what it's gambling with, and it does understand just now with the meetings in the EU, which in Europe writ large, which Xi Jinping attended, and also his meetings with the US counterparts, there is, of course, a risk. My guess is that probably the Russian side gave very optimistic accounts of their military advances and hinted, a little bit of help can go a long way. But whether or not Beijing actually will provide such help, given the risks, that remains to be seen.
Last week,
continue to provide.
Sure. I mean, last week, President Xi Jinping was doing a little tour of Europe. He made the first stop Paris. And I think President Macron was quite keen to try and persuade him to exert some influence over Moscow with regards to the war in Ukraine. I'm just wondering, it's been, 10 days since those talks in Paris. Do you think they paid any dividends?
Well, we do not see that in the readouts. We do not see that in the pageantry. Furthermore, we actually see that Russia is also trying to lend some support where it matters for China. and that is one of the joint statements. One of the statements had mentioned AUKUS as a threat, calling out Australia specifically as this big issue in international relations. In whose interest in that? Whose bidding is that? Obviously China's. So no, we do not see any signals that Beijing is in a hurry to teach or to talk to Putin on somehow de-escalating in Ukraine. And we did see that during the press conference, they called for a political solution, but a political solution basically is impossible at this point from the Ukrainian perspective, because a political solution that Russia and also China would be okay with basically would mean loss of territory of Ukraine.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time, but I would love to talk to you for longer. Thank you so much, political scientist Dr. Una Aleksandra Berzina-Cerenkova. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. The authorities in Slovakia have